Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Benluck Gamer, and we're back now with the fighter changes in the new remaster. And honestly, I wasn't expecting a ton of changes, but fighter actually got some buffs in this remaster, which I think is really interesting, considering a lot of people like to consider fighter to be one of the strongest classes. I don't, but that's an argument for a different video. And as well, it's very interesting to see how some of the standard rule changes are affecting fighter as well, which makes a lot of sense. There's been some changes to like the disarm or the reposition actions, which we will actually talk about because it will be relevant. But fighter is, I feel like, a lot smoother with some of their feats before, but I did pick up an error in the book. So it's definitely very interesting. But before we get to any of that, I want to thank Paizo for providing to me both the player core and the GM core so I could get all this information compiled for you guys and deliver it to you all. But I will say this video is not sponsored. All my thoughts and opinions are my own. Paizo just provided to me as one of their reviewers materials so that I could do the reviews. That's it. So with that being the case, let's get into fighter. So fighter, for the most part, stat-wise, did not change, besides the fact that now attack of opportunity has been changed to reactive strike. It's just a name change, and it makes a lot of sense considering D&D's use of attack of opportunity. So reactive strike was just one of the many changes needed from the OGL. So that being the case, we're going to be saying reactive strike from now on, and I've been doing that in most of my videos. But now we have like the official class of it. It's right here, reactive strike. So that's one change. So quickly moving on to the feats already, one big change that most of the fighter feats got was the removal of the open trait. Now feats like point blank shot, which actually got its name change here. 1 second. All right, camera moved. Point blank shot got changed to point blank stance, which makes much more sense because point blank shot was a stance. It just doesn't say stance in the name. So the point blank stance makes sense, and it lost the open trait. No longer is the open trait in the game. Fighter really didn't have many feats with the open trait to begin with, but Paizo removed the open trait mostly because it felt more restricting for fighters already somewhat restrictive fighting style. I mean, one of the biggest kind of core features of fighter is the press trait on many of their feats. The press trait requires them to have a multi-attack penalty in order to utilize, meaning that a lot of fighters' really good strikes are actually going to be less accurate than most other classes' good strikes because fighters require to have at least their first multi-attack penalty, which at minimum is a -4 and at most is a -5. So that being the case, the removal of the open trait just made the game feel easier and better, and your turns didn't get like pre-scripted for you, which is something I very much agree with. Another early level feat that lost the open trait was also sudden charge. Otherwise, it was unchanged. So not really too much to talk about on that end. And another name change, power attack got changed to vicious swing. So that's probably it was probably from D&D, or at the very least it was from first edition Pathfinder, which took a lot from D&D 3 point whatever. So that being the case, makes sense. And yeah, that's pretty much it for level 1. At level 2 though, some very interesting things. First of all, I noticed, well actually someone pointed out to me in stream, but I probably would have noticed anyway, the aggressive block free action it should have been is a reaction in the remaster. This has to be an error because the trigger is you use the shield block reaction and the opponent that triggered the shield block reaction is adjacent to you and is your size or smaller. There is no possible way to get a second reaction at this point in the game, especially for either shield block or aggressive block. So this must be the free action, which it was before. Otherwise, the action acts the same, but this is just an error in the book and needs to be errated out, which feels very ironic for essentially a core like errata book and now we have an errata that needs to be done in it. A small thing, and it's probably just a an error in the symbol, of course. Someone was probably not paying attention. Regardless, I figured I'd mention it. Now, Fighter did get a new feat at level 2. It's called Blade Break, and it's very interesting. Now, this one is a reaction. It also has the Manipulate trait, which I think is interesting too. And it's anytime you would be forced to do any kind of force movement effect, and you're wielding a weapon and are in reach of a hard surface, so you can't do this while flying, for instance, typically. But essentially, you plunge your weapon into the ground, and if you would be moved 20 feet or 20 feet or more, you're moved only 5 feet. Otherwise, you don't move at all. So this is a reaction that I'm sure not a lot of people are going to bother with taking. I like the idea behind it, and I like the idea of Blade Break. It's also probably a decent one to pick up with your, it's like combat flexibility. That's the feat I'm thinking of. Combat flexibility, it might be a good one depending on the scenario. You know you're going to be in an area where you don't want to fall off, for instance. That might be a pickup for it, but I don't see anyone actually picking up Blade Break. Regardless, I think it's very interesting, and I can see some situations where this can be really handy. And Fighter also got a second new feat at level 2. This one is a lightning swap, and it really goes into the new swapping rules. So if you're unfamiliar with the new swapping rules, there's now, as a part of the draw interact actions, there is a swap action where you can stow a weapon or sheath a weapon or whatever and draw another weapon as a singular action. That in itself already makes using multiple styles of weapons much more feasible in combat, much less encumbersome, but Lightning Swap takes it a whole nother step up. As what it does is, as a part of the single interact action, you can now stow any number of items from your hands and then draw up to 2 weapons or a shield and a weapon at the same time. So Lightning Swap allows fighters to completely change fighting styles, where the normal swap rules only essentially work for single weapon swaps, more or less. So I do actually thoroughly like this one, and I'm always a big fan of the Master of Arms styles of fighters who use multiple weapons for different situations. It's still an action tax, sure, but it's a much better action tax, and it doesn't require you to drop a weapon first. So I think Lightning Swap is overall really good. But even if you don't want to take Lightning Swap, you can still just drop your weapons and draw another one without needing to pick up the feat. I personally just like this one more for a variety of reasons. Dropping your weapons typically isn't a very great idea. So Lightning Swap, I think, fixes a lot of that and makes the fighter feel a lot better for using multiple types of weapons. There was another feat name change, but also it got changed. So Dragging Strike, which I believe was from the Advanced Player's Guide, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Dragging Strike got changed to Sleek Reposition, but now it is specific to either the use of finesse weapons or polearms. And it also makes use of the Reposition action. So, well, kind of. It counts as a reposition, even though it doesn't make you use the reposition action. So let's talk about the reposition action here. So the reposition action is a new action that has the attack trait, which is very interesting. And it's a singular action, and it's a requirement that you have at least one hand free, or you're grabbing or currently restraining a target. The target can't be more than one size larger than you. Obviously, that'll probably be changed with Titan Wrestler, the feats. And essentially what happens is you need to make an athletics check against the target's fort DC, and on a success, they move 5 feet, and they must remain within your reach the entire time. You can't move them into or through obstacles. And on crit success, it's 10 feet with the same stipulations. So this was a very good action because it was very hard to determine like how this would work in game. There was just no mechanics for it. Now we currently have an action for it. Sleek Reposition, then, speaking on that, says it automatically repositions the target with the same benefits as the reposition action. If you used a weapon with reach, use the weapon's reach for this reposition. This is, I think, a generally confusing thing they've added to the game because it's saying both you automatically use reposition, but obviously you're not using the action as well. It doesn't increase your multi-attack penalty because reposition normally has the attack action. So I think that's going to cause some people some confusion. I'll let you know with Seek Reposition, anytime it says it gets the same benefits as an action, it means it's not using that action. And even beyond that, the feat will tell you when the multi-attack increases for the additional actions, or it'll say like this action increases your multi-attack as if you had made 2 attacks or whatever. So Sacred Position does not increase your multi-attack any higher. It's just using reposition. And one of the reasons why I mentioned reposition as well is because currently there's not really much related to reposition as far as like weapon traits or feats or anything like that. But if in the future we get actions that improve reposition, for instance, like an archetype or whatever, this action here, Sleek Reposition, will trigger whatever benefits you get when you reposition an enemy, which is interesting and very good. So Sleek Reposition might be really good. Some people might be upset with the new weapon specification of a finesse or polearm weapon, when before it didn't really have any such thing. And on that end, I can say I'm happy to see fighter feats getting specific feats for use with certain types of weapons. It makes fighters want to use diversity, which is always a good thing. But I will say there's also not many feats besides this one that has such a requirement. So I don't know exactly how I feel about that, honestly. I don't think it was necessary for sure, but I don't think it's a bad thing either. In fact, I would like to see more fighter feats require specific types of weapons to better help players want to have a more diverse weapon arsenal than, of course, taking the standard best weapons that people tend to take. So that being the case, I'm rather neutral on it in the end. It's more restrictive, yes, but it also can lead to much better game design later. So I don't know. If you're upset about it, I would completely understand. And if not, then, you're just kind of in the same boat as me, I'm imagining. In any regard, Sleek Reposition has some interesting implications for the future design of fighters. And before we get on with more of the changes here, I still got quite a bit of the list to go. I do want to state, if you're enjoying this content, please like it so other people get a chance to see it, and subscribe to see more content like this. I'm going to be doing videos on the remaster every day until either I'm satisfied, which will be well into next week, or until the book officially releases on November 15th. So in any regard, if you want to see the content before anywhere else, you want to subscribe to this channel here, as there's no one who's pumping out as many videos on this as I am. But let's go ahead and continue on with the fighter. Knockdown got changed to slam down, just a name change, so you don't have to worry about anything there. Positioning Assault also makes mention that you reposition the target as if using the action. So again, for similar reasons as for the Sleek Reposition, this might have future implications for the use of this feat and for the future design of fighters. So that being the case, I just figured I'd make mention of it. Sudden Leap, an action that many people did not take, or a feat that many people did not take, now works a bit better. Before, Sudden Leap required that if you were using Felling Strike as a part of the action, you needed to expend an additional action. Now it doesn't have that requirement. So Sudden Leap now better synergizes with Felling Strike, allowing you to essentially get the benefits of an additional action in your turn. It's not a huge change, I'll admit, but it made the Felling Strike combo that should have been with this one way more taxing than necessary. So I do like this change quite a bit. And it's interesting, honestly, that it took this long to actually make this a thing. So this is a very good improvement in my eyes to a feat that, not many people would take, but I think now if you're going to take Felling Strike anyway, this becomes a lot more appetizing. Improved Knockdown got changed to Crushing Slam. I don't know why, honestly. Improved Slam Down could have worked just as well, but maybe they just wanted it to make more sense. And it does, I guess it is technically a different action, right? even though, well, Crashing Slam isn't an action though. So Slam Down just becomes Crashing Slam essentially. I don't know. Very, very interesting, but it's just a name change. It works more or less the same. Disarming Twist got an improvement. Now, if you are currently in the disarming stance, you get a +1 circumstance bonus to the attack roll when you make your disarming twist. This is actually pretty good, and it also, disarming stance and disarming twist in general, got a huge improvement thanks to the changes to the disarm action. As you can see here, the disarm action now, on a success, the enemy's grip is weakened as normal, giving you an item bonus, or anyone, I guess, a +2 item bonus to disarm checks on the target, and the target takes a -2 circumstance penalty to attacks with the item or other checks requiring a firm grasp to use. But the creature can end this interaction by changing their grip. Otherwise, it lasts as long as the creature holds the item. So Disarm now is a permanent -2 buff unless the enemy takes an action to change their grip. So that wastes an enemy action or forces the enemy to take a debuff to their attacks, depending on the situation. Of course, again, something that focuses mostly on enemies that use weapons, but there's a fair number of enemies that use weapons in the game. So I feel like Disarm now is much better, as it forces, more often than not, the enemy to expend an additional action to readjust their grip. So that being the case with disarming twists and disarming stance in general, the fighters are like, if you want to keep the enemy on the back foot, have a very high superiority in like a one-on-one situation, this is a really good way to force the enemy to either lose actions or lose their ability to hit you as easily. I really enjoy disarming. It now feels like you're being oppressive to the enemy fighter, even if you're not completely disarming them of their weapon. Disarm just works a lot better now, and so, inadvertently, disarming stance and disarming twist gained huge buffs and are much more appealing. At level 10, fighters gained yet another new feat, Flinging Charge, a 2-action ability that makes you stride twice, and at any point during that stride, you can make a ranged strike with a thrown weapon. If the strike hits, the target is then off guard against the next melee attack that you attempt against it before the end of your current turn. This is really good for closing in on long-distance enemies because you get to stride twice and make a strike on them. So after that, you can use any of the great press action, single action strikes on the enemy, or just a normal strike on the enemy after that. It's really good. It's a really good engagement tool, and again, makes fighters want to use different types of weapons, this time thrown weapons, which I think is a really good change. I really hope that we get to see more fighter feats in the future that make use of different types of weapons to give a much more improved style of play in general. And Flinging Charge also works really well with returning rune weapons, as you can throw it and then it comes back to you and then you can make a strike with it, which I think is also really cool. So overall, Flinging Charge is, again, in that line of feats that make you want to use different types of weapons, and I'm all here for it. Combat reflexes got changed to tactical reflexes. There's probably a reason. I'm not going to get to every time I mention there's a reason for a name change or not, someone is going to quote me again about whatever, and people just don't listen. So I'm not even going to go into on this one. Combat reflexes changes to tactical reflexes for a reason, and we'll leave it at that. Another name change, but this one making much more sense, is Spring Attack got changed to Dashing Strike. Spring Attack was always one of those very weird feats where the wording was confusing to the intent. Spring Attack made it sound like you made a leap action or something, but then it also could work with flight or burrowing or swimming. Dashing Strike makes a lot more sense. So yeah, Dashing Strike name change. It just makes the action itself much more easy to understand what the intent behind it was. 2 more feats that now use the reposition tag, I guess, in them. Not tag, but like the reposition action in a way, even though they still move them the same, is Guiding Finish and Guiding Reposition. So that is, again, kind of leading along the lines of, if anything affects repositioning, like the effects of repositioning, any feats you pick up later that they might add to the game, Guiding Finish and Guiding Reposse is now going to be able to benefit from those as well. Just something I thought I would mention for anyone who is curious. Just something that I feel like people need to remember so that they can remember later if anything with reposition gets changed, these feats will get a buff through it indirectly. So I it's something that I want people to be aware of, even if right now it doesn't really make much of a difference. Regardless, the two feats I mentioned are act just the same. So it's just a changing in some of the wording in those actions. Stance Savant got changed to Opening Stance, which makes a lot of sense. Opening Stance and Stance Savants, both respectively, were required to be used at the beginning of a combat, so Opening Stance obviously makes much more sense, name convention-wise, as it happens at the beginning of combat, where Stance Savant meant your character was very good at stances, which doesn't really translate, so Opening Stance, just another name change, not anything particular. Though I will say this does lead to Fighter actually gaining, I think, a Monk feat, which Monk is not in the core one for the remaster. That will be coming out next July. So that being the case, this Fighter technically has this feat first now, which I find interesting, which is Master of Many Styles, which as a free action at the beginning of your turn, you can switch stances. I actually really like that Fighter gets this now because Fighter arguably didn't have as many stances, obviously, as Monk did, but had enough that the feat was very worthwhile to have, and you just had no access to it. Master of Many Styles, I think, fits Fighter really well and allows you to, again, have much more dynamic fighting styles with Fighter, which I think a lot of the remaster is leaning more into. So I actually really like that this feat got added, and it's something that makes me very hopeful for future implications of either new fighter feats or even maybe new weapons that do a variety of new things. Regardless, I think this was much needed. I just find it funny that that Fighter's essentially stealing it before Monk comes out in Core 2, which is very silly. And well, one more thing just to mention before we end off the video, Whirlwind Strike no longer has the open trait, which I said before, no open traits exist for fighters anymore. So if there are any feats that you find for Fighter outside of the remasters, you can be most assured the open trait is going to be removed for any feats at this point. So that being the case, we're done with Fighter already. This is a relatively short video, but I do have to say the research took a significant amount of time. I made sure to read the text of all the feats, and that being the case, Fighter just has lots of feats. All the marshals do. So I'm going to spend just as much time on the videos, even if it's not as much time actually like editing because there's not as many changes. But that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, please like and or subscribe so more people can see this. If you're watching up to this point, I think I've earned it at this juncture here. And as well, I'll be releasing the Rogue video tomorrow. So if you want to see the changes to Rogue, and I will say, Eldritch Trickster got removed. So we got some very interesting things coming up with Rogue coming up tomorrow. So stay tuned on the channel. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.